In the 1700s, a Cotswold shepherd could look at a ewe from 30 feet away and tell you if she was carrying twins. He could count 400 sheep in under 2 minutes using a language that had nothing to do with English numbers. Number 9 on this list kept entire villages fed through winters with no refrigeration. Number 1 built the churches you still walk past today, paid for entirely in wool. These were not rare talents. They were the baseline for anyone working the hills between Chipping-Campden and Cirencester. Subscribe before we start, because most of this knowledge disappeared in a single generation. Number 20, judging a fleece by hand alone. Before wool graders existed as a profession, the shepherd was the grader. Running fingers through a raw fleece, he could tell staple length, crimp, and grease content without a single tool. A fine Cotswold lion fleece, the breed that built the region's fortune, could weigh 8 to 14 pounds and needed to be sorted before it ever reached a buyer. A shepherd who misjudged a fleece cost his employer real money, since wool merchants in Cirencester and Northleach paid by quality, not just weight. This skill took years to build because grease content changed with the season and even the individual animal. There was no shortcut. You either knew wool by touch or you did not work with sheep for long. Number 19, the Yan-Tan Tetherer counting system. Long before Arabic numerals were common on the hillside, Cotswold shepherds counted flocks using an older number system, believed to descend from Brythonic Celtic speech, with words like Yan, Tan, Tethera, Methera, and Pimp standing in for 1 through 5. A shepherd would count through the full sequence to 20, then drop a pebble in his pocket or notch a stick and start again. Counting 400 sheep this way took roughly 2 minutes for an experienced hand. The system varied slightly from valley to valley, but the logic was identical everywhere it survived. It let a man count a moving flock in poor light, in fog, or while doing something else entirely with his hands. Number 18, reading a flock without ear tags. Modern flocks rely on numbered tags and electronic chips. A Cotswold shepherd for the 20th century had none of that and still knew every animal individually, tracking gait, horn shape, face markings, and personality across a flock that could number in the hundreds. Losing track of even one ewe mattered because each animal represented real capital, and a missing sheep at lambing time could mean 2 dead animals instead of 1. This kind of memory was trained daily, simply by walking the flock and naming problems before they became visible to anyone else. Number 17, predicting weather from the sky and the sheep themselves. Long before forecasts existed, shepherds read cloud shape, wind direction, and the behavior of the flock itself to predict rain, frost, or storms rolling in off the Severn Vale. Sheep bunching tightly and grazing with unusual urgency was treated as a warning sign, since flocks were widely believed to feed heavily before a shift in pressure. A wrong guess meant losing lambs to exposure on an open hillside with no shelter for miles. This was not folklore treated lightly. Farms built entire schedules, shearing dates, lambing moves, and folding decisions around a shepherd's read of the coming weather, because being wrong could wipe out a season's income in a single bad night. Number 16, hand shearing with blade shears. Before mechanical clippers, every fleece in the Cotswolds came off with handheld blade shears, a skill requiring enormous upper body control to avoid cutting the animal while working fast enough to shear dozens of sheep in a day. A skilled shearer in the 1800s could manage 60 to 80 sheep in a full day, working from dawn, using nothing but leverage, rhythm, and a blade sharpened repeatedly through the morning. Shearing gangs traveled farm to farm during the season, competing openly on speed and cleanliness of cut, since a ragged fleece sold for less at market. Number 15, building and repairing dry stone walls without mortar. The Cotswolds are laced with thousands of miles of dry stone wall, built entirely from local limestone with no cement holding it together. A shepherd or waller selected stones by eye, placing larger through stones every few feet to bind the wall's two faces together, then filled the middle with smaller rubble for stability. A well-built wall could stand for over a century with no maintenance, and a badly built one could collapse within a single hard winter, letting an entire flock wander onto a neighbor's land or a public road. This was not simple stacking. It required understanding how stone shapes locked together under their own weight, a skill passed down through direct apprenticeship, since no manual could really teach it. Number 14, using raddle to track which ewes were served. When rams, known locally as tups, were turned out with ewes each autumn, shepherds strapped a harness holding a block of colored raddle, a waxy dye, to the ram's chest. Every ewe he mated left with a colored mark on her rump, letting the shepherd know exactly which animals were likely in lamb and roughly when to expect the birth. The color was changed partway through the season, so a second mark over the first told the shepherd a ewe had not conceived the first time. This system let a shepherd predict lambing dates for an entire flock without a single written record, simply by remembering which color went out on which date. First pattern break. Everything up to this point kept the flock alive and the wool sellable. What comes next kept entire households fed, warm, and financially afloat through winters that modern heating and refrigeration have made almost impossible to imagine. Number 13, folding sheep to fertilize arable land. Long before chemical fertilizer, Cotswold farmers moved portable wooden hurdles across their fields each night, penning the flock onto a different strip of ground to concentrate manure exactly where the next crop would grow. This practice, known simply as folding, was so central to the regional farming system that entire rotations were built around it, with sheep treated as a fertilizing tool as much as a wool and meat source. A shepherd moved these hurdles by hand, often daily, judging by eye how much ground needed covering and how long the flock should stay before moving on. Number 12, lambing without veterinary support. A shepherd handled breech births, twins tangled at birth, and weak lambs entirely by feel and experience, often working through the night in a cold barn or open field with nothing but his hands and basic tools. Knowing when to intervene and when to let nature proceed took years to judge correctly, since acting too early or too late could kill both ewe and lamb. Losses during a hard lambing season could run into a significant share of a flock's newborns, so a shepherd's steady hand during those weeks often determined whether a farm turned a profit that year. Number 11, making natural remedies for fly strike and foot rot. Before commercial treatments existed, shepherds used tar, pitch, and various herbal preparations to treat wounds and deter blowflies from laying eggs in a fleece during warm months, a condition that could kill a sheep within days if left untreated. Foot rot, a persistent problem in the damp Cotswold clay, was managed by regular hoof trimming and applications of tar-based mixtures, work done by hand on every affected animal individually. A shepherd checked feet constantly because a limping ewe fell behind the flock and became vulnerable to both disease and predation. Number 10, communicating with a dog through whistled commands alone. The sheepdog, breeds associated with droving in this region, ancestors of what later became known as the Old English sheepdog, worked from a vocabulary of whistles rather than shouted words, since a whistle carried further across open hillside in wind. Each shepherd developed his own dialect of tones for come by, away, lie down, and stop, and a well-trained dog could work a flock across acres of uneven ground on nothing but pitch and rhythm. Training a young dog into this system took roughly a year of daily work, and a good sheepdog was considered nearly as valuable as the shepherd himself. Number 9, preserving meat and dairy without refrigeration. Shepherding households salted and smoked mutton, made hard cheeses that could last through winter, and churned butter that kept for weeks in cool stone larders, all skills that had nothing to do with sheep directly, but were essential to surviving on an isolated hillside farm. A family that mismanaged its preserved stores faced real hunger before spring. So these techniques were taught to children as early as they could hold a knife or turn a churn. Second pattern may break. The next several entries are where shepherding stopped being survival and started being commerce. The part of the story that built the wool churches still standing across the region today. Number 8. Navigating drove roads by memory and stars, moving flocks to market. In London or regional fairs, sometimes meant walking sheep along drove roads for several days, timing movement to avoid the worst heat, and often traveling before dawn using stars and known landmarks rather than any map. A drover needed to know exactly where safe grazing and water existed along the route, since an entire flock's condition on arrival determined the price it fetched. Number 7. Spinning and carding wool at home. Long before the wool went to a mill, much of it was carded and spun by hand within the shepherd's own household, producing yarn for family clothing and sometimes extra thread sold for additional income. A skilled spinner could turn raw fleece into usable yarn steadily through winter evenings, work done almost entirely by feel, since spinning wheels of the era had no mechanical guides. Number 6. Reading soil and grass quality to plan grazing. A shepherd rotated flocks across different pastures based on grass height, soil dampness, and even subtle mineral differences he could sense through the health of the animals themselves, since overgrazing one field could ruin its yield for an entire following season. Poor grazing management was one of the fastest ways to destroy a farm's long-term value, so this judgment carried enormous financial weight. Number 5. Building and living in a shepherd's hut during lambing season. Mobile huts on iron wheels let a shepherd sleep directly beside a flock through the most dangerous weeks of the year, fitted with a small stove, a bunk, and just enough space to store lambing tools. These huts were moved by horse from field to field, letting the shepherd stay within earshot of a distressed ewe at 3 in the morning, rather than walking from a distant farmhouse. Number 4. Negotiating fleece prices directly with wool merchants. Before centralized markets standardized pricing, a head shepherd often represented the farm directly with traveling wool buyers, using his own judgment of fleece quality to argue for a fair price on the spot. A shepherd who consistently undersold his wool cost the farm real income year after year, so this negotiating skill was valued as highly as any physical task on the hillside. Number 3. Treating internal parasites with traditional knowledge. Long before modern wormers existed, shepherds managed parasite loads through pasture rotation, careful observation of coat condition and appetite, and various herbal treatments passed down through direct experience rather than written veterinary science. A flock left unmanaged could lose significant condition within a single season, making this quiet, unglamorous vigilance one of the most financially important skills a shepherd carried. Number 2, teaching the trade entirely through apprenticeship. There was no formal school for shepherding in the Cotswolds through most of its history. A boy learned by walking behind an experienced shepherd for years, absorbing weather judgment, lambing technique, and wall building by watching and repeating, not by reading. This method produced remarkably consistent knowledge across generations, since every skill on this list had already been tested against real losses long before it was ever explained in words. Number 1, building wealth and community entirely from wool. The so-called wool churches of towns like Chipping-Campden, Northleach, and Cirencester were funded almost entirely by profits from Cotswold lion fleece, some of the finest long wool in medieval Europe, exported as far as Italy and Flanders. A single successful wool merchant family could fund a church tower, a market hall, or an entire almshouse, and the shepherds working the surrounding hills were the foundation that made all of it possible. Every skill on this list, the counting system, the weather reading, the hand shearing, the fold rotation, existed to protect and grow that wool income, one flock and one season at a time. Machines eventually replaced almost every task described here, from mechanical shears to electric fencing, to veterinary medicine delivered by injection instead of instinct. What they could not replace easily was the judgment built over a lifetime on that hillside. The kind that let one man look at 400 sheep and know, without writing anything down, exactly what each one needed. Try just one of these. This week, count something the old way, or read the sky before checking your phone and see how close you get. Then come back and tell me if the shepherd would have been right.